Good evening, everyone, and welcome to KRVIA Encounters. Today we
Maybe
have.
wait.
Okay, sorry. I thought the started. Sorry.
Hi, Avni.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi. So you're a first year student, second year student,
Third year
You'll have
student.
only 2 minutes, okay, Avni?
Yeah,
third
yeah.
year.
Yeah.
And so most of the students who are attending here are what year are they
Se-
in?
Second, third, fourth year, fifth year. All of them. We
So not
have.
a lot of first year students.
Yeah. We have second and third year students. We don't have first years with us right now. They haven't been. Their admissions have not started yet.
I see.
Yeah.
What do you mean the admissions have not started yet? You mean the first years haven't started school yet?
Yeah. They haven't.
Oh, that's interesting. So the second to fifth have started classes, but the first hasn't.
Yeah, they haven't. Their competition exams and their school exams get over later in July and August. So
Okay.
after that, the admission procedure starts. So it takes usually by September, everybody gets into college.
Oh, wow. And so what happens when the year ends, you guys leave school earlier than them? Or you're in school 3 months longer than the first years?
Um, no, I don't know what happens then. I think they get a smaller summer vacation between the first year and the second year. So they continue till July while we get a break till June. Break from June.
Interesting. That's not how I left 33 years ago. I, I don't remember anything.
How do you pronounce your name so that I can get it right?
Genevieve,
And the surname?
Castelino.
Got it. Thank you.
God, I hope I can get through this presentation without completely bombing on the technology.
You'll be able to. It's easy.
Because I've created this very complicated setup. Completely I've got like bombing on the three technology. monitors going right now.
You'll be able to. It's easy.
So I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Because I've created this
Good to
very
go.
complicated
All right.
setup.
Completely
I've got like
bombing on the
three
technology.
monitors going right now.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to KRVIA Encounters.
So I'm not sure what I'm
Today we have
looking
Genevieve
at.
Castelino with us.
Because
Genevieve
I've
Castelino is
created
an
this
architect,
very
writer, and an
complicated
award-winning
setup. I've got
filmmaker.
like
On the
three
She was
monitors
most
going right
recently
now.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to KRVIA Encounters.
So I'm
A
not
full
sure
service
what I'm
day, we
looking
have
at.
Genevieve Castelino focusing on global
Because
airports. Genevieve has
I've
structured developed
created
an
this
architect, writer,
very
and
complicated
award-winning
setup. I've got like
filmmaker.
three
Genevieve, she was
monitors
most
going right
recently
now.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to KRVIA Encounters.
So I'm
A
not
full
sure
service
what I'm
day, we
looking
have
at.
Genevieve Castelino focusing on global airports. Genevieve has
I've
work
created
has been
this
published in the North
very
American and entire
complicated
India
setup. I've
television.
got like
Genevieve,
three
she was
monitors
most
going right
recently
now.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to KRVIA.
So I'm
A
not
full
sure
service
what I'm
day, we
looking
have
at.
Genevieve Castelino. She's currently at work. Genevieve has
I've
work
created
has been
this
published in the North
very
American and entire
complicated
India
setup. I've
television.
got like three
Genevieve, she was
monitors
most
going right
recently
now.
and a bachelor's in architecture from the LS Raheja School of Architecture, Mumbai. Welcome, Genevieve, to KRVIA. The stage is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Avni. That was a very sweet introduction. Um, Thank you, Mamta, and thank you, Manoj. Actually, Manoj and I went to the same school, LS Raheja, and I also want to thank my husband, Kiran Merchant. Some of you might remember him from the presentation he did on the TWA hotel. All right, so hopefully I'm going to get through this without causing any kind of technical snafus. Forgive me if that happens. Um, I'm here to present Frank Lloyd Wright and the Christie House, as you can hopefully see it behind me. Um, let's So I'm here to talk about Frank Lloyd Wright. I became a fan of Frank Lloyd Wright while I was studying architecture in the LS Raheja School in Mumbai in the 1980s. It's been a long journey from Mumbai to America. And 33 years later, Kiran and I have the privilege of living and restoring a house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And I'm excited to share our journey with you. By the end of this presentation, I hope to achieve four things. If you're familiar with Frank Lloyd Wright, then we will share an appreciation for his work and his vision. If you're not familiar with Mr. Wright, I hope by the end of this presentation you will find reason to look at his work. And finally, of course, I'm going to share with you my own personal experience and what it feels like to restore, to live in, and really be a steward of his work for future generations of architects in America and the world. We're going to do this in 5 parts: the man, his work, Usonian architecture, which Christie House is an example of that, the Christie House, and finally some concluding thoughts. It is very difficult to, well, at least I found it very difficult to summarize Frank Lloyd Wright, a 72-year career, designed over 1,000 buildings, 500 or more were built. He wrote 20 books. There are so many interviews and television interviews to choose from. So it was really a challenge to figure out, what it is that I wanted to show you about this man who I so deeply admire. Frank Lloyd Wright also pioneered the prairie style of architecture, Usonian architecture, and many will remember him for his very bold use of cantilevers, among many other ideas. In 1991, Wright was recognized by the American Institute of Architects as the greatest American architect of all time. In terms of his timeline, obviously this is not his entire timeline, but I wanted to show you 3 distinct periods of his life. He's born in 1867 and moves to Chicago when he's only 20 years old. He moves to Chicago for work. And he does a lot of residential work in his 20s. In his 30s and 40s, his personal life becomes very chaotic, and he suffers a string of catastrophes, calamities in his marriages, of which he had multiple, his finances and his practice. And during that time, it honestly felt like his career was over. But then come the mid-30s, and he comes back roaring. He's in his late 60s by this time, and he enters the most exciting chapter of his career with buildings like the Fallingwater House, the Guggenheim, and so on. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about Frank Lloyd Wright's lifetime. He lived for 91 years, and those 91 years were an extraordinary time of, wars and the influenza pandemic, the Great Depression, racial segregation. You might wonder why it is that, a timeline is relevant, right? And here are the reasons I think it's relevant. First of all, as architects, we design spaces that human beings live, work, and play in. And the design decisions that we make last for decades, if not centuries. Secondly, we are currently living in a world facing climate change and wars and a pandemic and large numbers of people migrating and being displaced, and fears that technology will displace humans. And that was pretty much the world that Frank Lloyd lived in as well. And finally, the third reason I think that a timeline is so important is because we've now had over 100 years to see the impact of the inventions of his lifetime. And so all of us have, and certainly you as this young generation that's going to go out and do things, you have the opportunity to look back, to learn and see what doesn't work and fix it and improve upon what does. So let's take a look at some of the things that was happening in his lifetime. Architecturally, a lot of people were coming in from Europe, and so a lot of American architecture at the time was revival styles of Europe, colonial, Spanish colonial, international, and so on. In society, Wright was born just 2 years after a very bloody civil war in America. Racial segregation was tearing the country apart, and you know, oftentimes when talking about Wright, there is a bit of a blind spot in terms of what Wright was doing in a racially segregated America. And I think it is important to note that, like many of his generation, he was pursuing an architecture that was a systematic exclusion of Black people. And the repercussions of that are still being felt in cities and suburbs across the country. Um, the other big thing that was happening in his lifetime, obviously, was the second industrial revolution, which brought in with it so many inventions, followed by the Gilded Age, which brought in rapid economic growth and tremendous wealth, and also tremendous inequality. Again, something that we can recognize from our times. Many of the life-changing inventions that happened in his lifetime are things that, we take for granted today, such as the telephone, the light bulb, cars, skyscrapers, airplanes. But in those days, it was changing the basic nature in which people lived and traveled and communicated. Um, So now we move on to the S.E. Johnson administration building. Frank Lloyd Wright is such a big character, and he has so many stories to tell about him. One of my favorite ones is the S.E. Johnson building in Wisconsin. It was constructed between 1937 and 1939, and this here is an iconic image of the columns in that building. They're 18.5 feet in diameter at the top, and at the base, it's just 9 inches, and the column is hollow. The Wisconsin Industrial Commission refused to give approval to build this building because they thought the design of these columns was unrealistic, and they wanted him to prove that it could work. So Wright organizes a test, and hundreds of people show up to look at this test. And so, as you can see the column on the right, they start loading up the column with weight. It reaches double the weight, and the inspectors are happy, and they said, all right, this is fine. But Wright says, no, keep going and keep going. And so they end up putting 10 times the weight till the weight on top of that column reaches 60 tons, 10 times the weight of what the inspectors expected. And of course, there is a little bit of story which nobody can verify, but it is said that Frank Lloyd Wright took his stick and broke the scaffolding in frustration that somebody had doubted his engineering genius. There's no proof of that, but that is a story that's often told. Anyway, the building was approved, and that's one of my favorite stories, which really encapsulates how full of life and big personality he was. Frank Lloyd Wright was a bold thinker and a visionary. Here he is in 1956. At this time, he's probably 88 years old. This is 3 years before he passes away. And he's presenting a mile-high skyscraper, which is proposed to stand 528 floors. In fact, the illustration behind him, I was wondering whether I should crop this image, but I thought it was such an extraordinary image of a 25-foot, illustration to talk about his vision. That's another one of my favorite stories. So what are Wright's influences in architecture? I think, obviously the biggest one for me is open plans. Organic architecture, obviously, if you Google organic architecture, his is the first name that's going to show up. It was basically building a house with natural materials that was sourced locally, affordable, easily buildable. I mean, we're all from India and we already know organic architecture because that's the kind of buildings that were being built for centuries there. He's also famous for garages. Later on in this presentation, I'll show you the carport, and he's credited with building that. Of course, Wright wanted residential architecture to be individualistic and uniquely American. That idea never caught on, but a lot of his work was replicated in ranch-style houses that mushroomed all over the countryside. It was very difficult to figure out, which buildings to show you because, as I told you, I'm a huge fan, and so I had to pick some buildings to show you, how I feel about him, and I picked the 8 buildings that are on the UNESCO's World Heritage List. I haven't put them in order, but it's the Fallingwater House, the Unity Temple, the Guggenheim Museum, Taliesin East, the Hollyhock House, the Frederick Roby House, the Catherine Jacobs House, and the Taliesin West. This is Frank Lloyd Wright, and this is the Fallingwater House. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on here because every part of the reason why I love him and his work relates to the Fallingwater House. So this is the mid-80s in India, and I see a picture of the Fallingwater House in our library. There is something about this particular image, and I know that it was this photograph, maybe a different photograph, but this perspective. And there is something about this house that is nestled in greenery with water, with these clean lines that, as a first-year architecture student, not knowing anything about architecture, it was instant love. And I spent hours and hours doodling this house. I wasn't very good in school, but I was definitely good at sketching this house. And as Edgar Kaufman says about this house, that Fallingwater was created by Wright as a declaration that in nature, man finds his spiritual as well as his physical energies, that a harmonious response to nature yields the poetry and joy that nourish human living. And I can tell you, when my husband and I visited this house in the early 90s, I cannot describe to you the feeling of being in a space that you've seen a 2-dimensional picture of, and then you're in that space. And the closest I can say is, for me, it was a spiritual experience. So let me talk about some of the other houses. I'm sorry I'm going back and forth because I've got 3 monitors here. So I'm trying to figure out where I am at any given moment. So when I'm pausing, it's because I'm trying to figure out on which monitor my stuff is. Anyway, so where are we? This is the Unity temple. This is the Guggenheim Museum. And we were here, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago, looking at this is the interior of the Guggenheim Museum. And we saw the Vasily Kandinsky exhibit here last month. And this was another, Kandinsky is one of my favorite artists. And seeing Kandinsky here in the Guggenheim Museum was, another spiritual experience. This is Taliesin in Wisconsin, which is Wright's home, school, and studio. This was originally on land purchased by his mother's family, and the name symbolized Wright's intention to create a home that was off the hill and not on the hill, and I will describe that later when I show you our house. This is the Hollyhock House, which was built for Aileen Barnstill, who was an oil heiress and a theater producer. This is another view of the house. It's just a spectacular house. She donated it to the city of Los Angeles within a few years of building it. This is the Roby House. The Roby House is a masterpiece of Wright's prairie design. And as you can see here, this is Wright in full control of his work. He designed everything in this house, from the lights to the furniture to the windows. He was in control of every brick and every carpet and every furnishing that went into this house, and it is absolutely a masterpiece. This is Taliesin in Wisconsin. This was built in. I'm sorry. This is wrong. This is Taliesin actually in Arizona. The caption is wrong. This is where he spent his time with 625 students. He used to spend his summers here living, working, teaching till he passed away in 1959. There is an Indian connection with Taliesin in Arizona, and I don't know if some of you are familiar with Nari Gandhi. It is said that there were 4 other Indian students at Taliesin. I couldn't find any record of them, but Nari Gandhi was certainly someone we knew when we were in architecture school. And here you can see this rock, which is at the entrance of Taliesin West. And it is said that, Nari Gandhi showed up late to breakfast one day and Wright wasn't very happy. But he hauls in this rock, and Wright felt that this rock had the figure of a woman and placed it at the entrance of Taliesin, where it still is today. This is the Herbert Jacobs house. It is recognized as the first example of Wright's Usonian architecture. And it, over time, his Usonian houses started changing, but this one is the purest example of Wright's Usonian architecture. So what exactly is Usonian architecture? As I told you in a slide before, during his time, there was a lot of migration from Europe. In fact, I believe there were over 25 million people who came from Europe to America. And obviously, with the wars and such going on, there was a lot of news and, pictures, I imagine, coming in from Europe, and people were trying to recreate Europe in America. Whereas Wright, who was born in Wisconsin and really grew up in rural America, which had this vast landscape, was desperate to have an architecture that was uniquely American, that was not borrowed from other countries. The word Usonia is credited to Wright, but there are examples of other people using them and using that word. And if you Google it, you'll get a little more information about it. What are some of the features of Usonian architecture? Again, this is what I'll show you in the Christie House, but dominant horizontal lines, again, replicating the vastness of the American landscape. designed on grids. Our house is on a 2x4 grid, but there were hexagonal grids and other grids, circular grids that he built on. Floor to ceiling windows, because as I'll show you, Wright was just amazing in the way he used natural light. Typically, there are three areas: the living space, the kitchen space, and the bedrooms, and they were separate from each other, so that there was a private area, a public area, and the kitchen space, which tied both together. Carports, which I'll show you. Usonian architecture removed attics and basements. It was a house on one level, so it was built on concrete slab, flat roofs, long, huge, I don't know why that happens, cantilevered roofs, radiant heating. In this regard, he was so ahead of his time. In the 1940s, he was doing radiant heating in the floor, which today has come back in vogue, and people kind of leaning away from central air and going to radiant heating. Inbuilt furniture. This is a little bit of Wright being right, believing that people kind of didn't have very good taste. And so he was going to design the furniture for his houses. Central fireplaces. I don't know if you can see it behind me, but the fireplace was very central to Usonian houses. This was a place that he believed, people would gather after long days of work. And of course, open plans. I showed you the Jacobs house, and at the time I told you that he would customize houses based on the client. So here's another example of these ornate kind of windows. This is the Pope Leahy house, designed in 1940. This is the Affleck house, designed in 1940, and this is our house. It's the James B. Christie House. Every house that he designed took on the name of the owner who asked him for it. This is, since we bought this house a year or more ago, I've actually been recovering a lot of material from the various museums where all of this information is stored. And I just, in fact, unfortunately, I didn't have time to put it together to show it to you, but there's an extraordinary series of 47 letters between James B. Christie and Frank Lloyd Wright. And you can imagine that 1939, 3 years after Frank Lloyd Wright designs the Fallingwater House, he is at that time one of the biggest, most popular architect in America. And you have this 39-year-old lawyer from New York City who writes to who is the country's biggest architect and says, would you design me a house? And the architect, who is Frank Lloyd Wright, says, yeah. And then of course there's an extraordinary amount of communication. Christie writes this 5-page letter. Let me tell you, as a practicing architect, this is the kind of client you want. He writes everything in there. He writes how much money he has, what he wants, his interests, his life, his wife's interests, his plans in 5 years, his plans in 2 years, the fact that he's going to have horses and where he's going to, that's the kind of client brief that is absolute gold. And of course, as typical with Wright, things don't go very well. The construction is a nightmare. The house is over budget and things don't go very well. And at that point, Wright and Christie are having arguments. And then the wife steps in and she writes this beautiful letter. And I'll just tell you this one line, which I think the women in this audience will appreciate, that the woman finally steps in to take charge. And basically she tells Wright, you've designed us a house that cannot be built without your help. So she's practically begging him to get involved and make sure that this house gets completed. So this is some of, kind of the background stories of a house that we're restoring that completely fascinate me as a writer and a filmmaker. So the Christie House is designed in 1940. It's built in 1940. It's the largest Usonian house in New Jersey. It's about 2,700 square feet. The original site was about 12 acres, and we've got 4 streams on the property. There's a stream right down here. You know, when I come out of the bedroom in the morning, I stand there. It's beautiful. It's an L-shaped Usonian designed on a 2x4 grid with 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. This is an aerial view of the house. As you can see, we're in the middle of a forest. And actually just down the road, 2 miles from here, is the Jockey Hollow Park, which as an immigrant, to me, makes me a little emotional that, one, obviously I get to live in a house by the architect who I deeply admire, but also that the Jockey Hollow Park is where this country started, because that's the place where George Washington parked with 10,000 of his soldiers in the war that they fought with the British. So it's kind of, you know, living at the crossroads of American history as well as architectural history. This is my favorite quote, and I have to tell you, it's my favorite quote because it describes what to me was the happiest experience living in India was my grandmother's house. And my grandmother's house was on a hill in Mangalore. I believe it's called Mangaluru now. But our house was on a hill, and it had red floors like Frank Lloyd Wright's house. And this quote describes my grandmother's house. It says, "I knew well that no house should ever be on a hill or on anything. It should be off the hill. Hill and house should live together, lift each other the happier for the other." It's just such a beautiful quote. And every time I read it, you know, I think of Mangalore, and I think of, you know, the rains coming in through our portico, and I get a little happy and romantic. Hello? Is everything okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry, I just heard some audio. This is the house, and this is the view from, it is a hilly area where we live. And as you can see, the previous quote that I read to you, this is the house. And, you know, it's really funny because, you know, sometimes people come here and they're wondering where the house is. You know, every time the FedEx or the UPS guys, they come onto the driveway and are very confused about where the actual house is, because this is what they see, and they're not used to it because there's nothing like it in the rest of New Jersey. This is the original perspective, and these drawings are now in the Museum of Modern Art. This is the view of the back of the house, as well as the side, which I'll show you a picture shortly. These are the original drawings that were part of an exhibit on his 155th birthday. This is the back of the house. On the right of your screen, that patio is right off the master bedroom, and the stream is literally 10 feet from there. And it's magical when I stand there in the morning listening to the water. So this is the house from the back, and as you can see, the private area, which is the deck, which is, you know, to the left of your screen, and the private area, the bedrooms, this is on the right. As you can see, and just off that tree, you see the chimney going up there. That's a fireplace in the bedroom. This is a view. This is a few months after we bought the house in 2020. Kiran, who is my husband, and I, we were like the S.E. Johnson inspectors because we had 3.5 feet of snow that fell. And like the inspectors, we had never seen so much snow on a flat roof. And we thought the roof was going to collapse. And we used to come here every day because at that time we were still doing work on the house, expecting the roof to collapse. But obviously it didn't. But I keep this picture because it's just so beautiful. It's like, it's like a Christmas postcard. And like the Wisconsin inspectors, obviously we were proven wrong and the roof is still here and the house is still here. This is, oh, how do I go back? Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. All right, sorry. This is the side view of the house. This is the view at night. And I wanted to show you this because of these extraordinary horizontal lines. The house is so long, it's difficult to get a picture of the whole house. And I have to go way back into the woods to get this picture. Here is slightly close up. I love this image because, my neighbor always tells me, she says, I wait for you to turn on the lights in the evening because your house looks like a lantern, because their house is lower on the hill from us. And she says, I wait for your lantern to light up. This is a view from the front of the house when you just come off the driveway. I just want to show you here the different levels of the roof because this is something he plays with a lot, levels on the roof. This is the carport. Wright grew up in a time, I told you, when gasoline powered cars came in, and he was a huge fan of cars, and it is said that he had almost 85 cars and at various times, and he had the best cars, so obviously he designed many of his houses with carports. And, today, this is obviously my personal opinion at a time when we are experiencing climate change and America has been built as this car-centric country where, such a large country with suburbs that have just expanded and expanded into the countryside. And it has become such a car-dependent country. I can't even get milk without having to drive 5 miles so this might be one of the ideas that should not have been replicated, one of Wright's ideas that should not have been replicated, but did. This is when you enter the house from the carport. And what I'd like you to see here is the extraordinary light and shadow that he plays with. He really understands the direction of the sun. He was a guy who, believed in natural heating and cooling, and so designed the house to follow the direction of the sun. And in the winter, when the sun comes in, it truly does raise the temperature of the house to as much as 68 degrees. This here is a little bit of the restoration process. As you can see on the left, this is how it looked before we got here. And the floor, I just wanted to talk to you about this red color. If you've been to houses in South India, if you go to Kerala or Mangalore or Coorg or any of these places, you will be familiar with red floors. These are red oxide floors. And I remember when I was a kid, we used to get down on our floors and polish the floors with red wax. And the real estate agent, when we walked into the house, and he said he knew that we were going to buy the house because when I walked in and I looked on the floor, he said, you had this huge smile and I knew that you were going to buy the house. This particular color is called Cherokee red. Obviously, probably inspired from Native American architecture where he was in Arizona. And over the years, you know, the Cherokee red has changed tone, but this is what we were able to find was the latest that was available. This is another view of the house before restoration. This is the living room. And here it is after restoration. You know, the floors were probably the biggest part of the restoration that we did. The other thing you want to see here in this picture is just the windows. I haven't actually counted, but I think 95% of the exterior walls is windows, and you can see the beautiful, warm, honey-colored light that comes from having a house built with wood and brick and glass and concrete. 4 materials, that's it. No steel, no nothing else. Just simple 4 materials. And in fact, also a lot of rocks that were found on site. This is probably the view that you're seeing now because I'm facing the other way. And here's the fireplace if you didn't see it in the previous image. And you can see the different layers of the roof. In this picture, I also want you to look to your upper left and see the clear story windows over there. This is Wright really at every opportunity he gets trying to break the demarcation between the exterior and the interior. And by putting windows everywhere, wherever you are in the house, you are constantly, your vision is diverted outside to the windows and to the landscape outside. This is a view of the floor to ceiling windows right here in the living room. This is the house at night. I captured this at dusk. This was around 8 o'clock at night. And if you look at the light, the reflected light that he uses off the ceiling, at night, the house inside literally feels like you are wrapped in honey. It's so warm, the light, and diffused. This is a view from toward the kitchen. The kitchen is in the far background. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this because when we talk about Wright's open plan, you know, he designed the kitchen as the place from which the living area would be on one side and the private area, the bedrooms, would be on the other, and the kitchen was going to be at the junction of the two. His idea being that, you know, when the woman who's cooking and cleaning, because this is what the expectation of women is, that she would also have the kids around her and, you know, the space would be broken up so it wasn't rooms. He eliminated the dining room and made it an open plan, which is all very well and good. But as a woman who does do all of the cooking, I absolutely detest this kitchen because the ceilings are low. It is the darkest room in the house. And of course, you know, I'm cooking Indian food most of the time, so the ventilation isn't very good. This fellow visits us during the summer and throughout the year with his family. So it doesn't help. I can't open the windows because obviously, you know, bears are supposed to have 65 times better smelling sense than dogs. So obviously I don't want to invite him into my kitchen to have dinner with us. But yeah, so, and you know, I'm obviously not the only woman. There was a woman in another Usonian house that he designed who complained about this to him and wrote him, you know, a stinging letter saying, no, this is not going to work. And evidently he did change it in other Usonian houses, but we weren't beneficiaries of that. So there's the bear. I love him. So I'm just going to show you the picture again. Here's another feature of the house, and here's another Wright quote that I think is just one of my favorite quotes. As he said, the corner window is an idea that I had early in my work, that the box is a fascist symbol. Remember that he is, practicing architecture in the 30s and 40s during the Second World War. The architecture of freedom and democracy needed something besides the box. So I started out to destroy the box as a building. The corner window came in as all the comprehension that was ever given to that act of the destruction of the box. Light came in where it never came in before. Vision went out, and you had screens instead of walls. The walls vanished as walls, and the box vanished as a box. And the corner window went around the world, but the idea of it never followed it. When you stand in front of this corner window, it is such a marvel. On the left, you will see that's my daughter's bedroom. And, you open up that door and suddenly there's no difference between outside and inside. The only thing is you have a roof on top. And it really does break the feeling of being in a box because there is no support at that corner. And the window on the right is actually the window in the living room. And actually that's where the bear hangs out. So, I've showed you all these amazing things about, Wright and the work he did. And but in addition to the kitchen, there's obviously issues. And this house now is almost 82 years old. And some of these issues were there obviously right from the beginning. So the first one is the roof water. I am not sure why he thought a flat roof in New Jersey worked, because we get snow, we get rain. And right now, for the past 3 years, we've been having an extraordinary amount of rain. And literally the roof turns into a waterfall from all sides. The water is just cascading off the roof. This view is from the carport. So if we don't put something there to catch the water, all that water literally comes right into the house. The second issue is air conditioning. Wright had very strong opinions on air conditioning. He didn't like it. And he said it's, basically his quote is that it's a dangerous circumstance, that the extreme changes in temperature that tear down a building also tear down the human body. And he thought that we should not live with air conditioning, which is great, except that now the summer temperatures hit almost 37, 38 degrees centigrade, sometimes 99 degrees Fahrenheit. And because the roof in the bedroom is only 6'10" high, and the roof itself is only about 9 inches thick, you're sitting there feeling like you're literally sitting in a desert with the sun on top of your head with a black tarp. It's not comfortable, and even 3 fans does not help. The other, you may not remember this, but in an earlier picture, I showed you the side view of this house, and you have this cantilever. It's a beautiful cantilever roof, which obviously.
Hi. I just wanted to remind you we have 10 minutes remaining.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I'm almost done. We're second to last, I think, slide. So this is the cantilever support. As you can see, there was an earlier resident of the house propped that roof up with a pole. And we're never going to take off that pole, because if we do, the roof's going to fall. And we can't restore that because it would be a very expensive process. So this is actually the final slide. And so it's an 82-year-old house. It's got issues. I'm obviously in love with it. And I think it is so important to keep these homes, preserve these homes because one, Wright is an architect who's known around the world, and every summer we have a lot of people who just roll in off the street to come and look at the house. So, he's got fans from all over the world. It is important to keep this for history, and to the best of our ability, that's what we're going to do. And with that, I'm going to end this presentation. Here are some resources. At the end of, if you get a chance, you should read some of them. I don't know, I guess Mamta can send this out to you. That's it. Thank you so much for your time. Hello?
Yeah, thanks. Denise, I think, yeah, Avni, do you want to call on Manoj first?
Yeah. Hi, Manoj.
Hi, Jenny, how are you?
Hi, Manoj, how are you? I haven't heard that I haven't heard myself called Jenny in a long time. Hold on, let me just stop sharing this so that I can look at you. Yeah. How do I stop sharing?
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. Sorry. Go ahead.
You stopped sharing.
I have, right? All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You stop sharing. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to look at you off this monitor.
Yeah. So this has been long since we met. I guess we were interacting during college time. I was maybe in fourth year, or you were in second year or something. I still have memory. Used to come to Santa Cruz with Kiran, and we used to discuss something on design. Although we lived a little bit, I mean, I was in US for some time, and Kiran and you, I think, went to US. But very recently, I was in US like last month, and I had to change my plan because of whatever, some reason. But really nice to have you on this platform. And it's also nice to see Frank Lloyd Wright House. And you two are the owner of the house. So I think it revives lots of memory. I mean, of course, I've not seen the Christie House, but I've seen lots of building union houses right across US. So this is like reviving memory of college time. Thanks. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And I would now leave it to Avni if students have any question.
Thank you.
Would you like to add something, Manoj, to this with regards to an FLW house?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, of course, we have seen FLW houses in the books, but when I was learning, very strange, okay, when I was learning AutoCAD for the first time in my life in '88. So we used to take Roby House, understand, the basic form of the building. And I got a book which has a cardboard to cut. So you cut the cardboard, and you fold the cardboard, and you build a Roby house like for a small kid, you give it. So that I use that model to construct the 3D of Roby house. Of course, the Mies house also, Frankfurt house, to learn AutoCAD and 3D at that time. Of course, the larger, domain in terms of form is more about horizontal pull, of the building. I mean, they are, almost like a Mondrianistic painting in that sense. And it used to say that, Frank Lloyd Wright house would hug the ground, while Cobb house would elevate, from the ground. And it kind of shows the approach that someone is so close to, someone is trying to understand nature, someone is trying to capture the nature. And there are many more houses doing wonderful kind of a capturing of views. I mean, Telliers in West is one of my favorite. I mean, of course, I've not visited, but I feel that whenever I come next time, that's a place I would like to visit.
We should do that together. Actually,
Yeah.
Kiran and I were scheduled to go there because, because we have a Frank Lloyd Wright house, we are part of the Frank Lloyd Wright homeowners thing. So they were going to give us a tour of the thing, and we got COVID, both of us. It was like, I was so upset. I mean, I was really upset. Um, but
So,
when you talk about, sorry, I just wanted to jump in very quickly with another story. When you talk about houses hugging the ground, right? And I told you that's what I felt our house in Mangalore did. It hugged the ground. It was, low and to the roof. And it was funny, the UPS guy came here the other day and he said, "That's a house? I thought that's where you keep the horses." Like, no, that's where we keep the people. We don't have horses. But he actually thought this was a stable. That's how close to the ground it is.
Yeah, that's what I saw. First house was kind of reconstructed under the metro line of Miami. They built this live house under the metro, and they were open for public. That's my first encounter with Usonian house. It's a tiny house actually, and but a lot of features you can identify through geometry of the building. That whole idea of horizontal pull, and articulating important function of the building like a centripetal force kind of a thing. So that's something that I remember of FL right across. And just to inform you that there are three more architects who worked with Frank Lloyd Wright besides Nari Gandhi. One was Rustam Patel from Patel Batewala and Associate. Rustam Patel designed this building, Juhu, that Manekji Cooper School, which is recently demolished.
Oh, they demolished it.
Yeah, demolished. Yeah, I mean, this was very close to what FL Wright would do. And there is one more building Rustam Patel designed. It is still existing on the Juhu beach. It will replicate exactly what FL Wright has done in US. I mean, exactly the same. It has got horizontal bars pulling out, and there is a tall chimney coming out of the center of the building. It still exists. We don't know who is the owner. And there is one more person who worked with FL Wright was Arvind Mistry from Ahmedabad. Of course, he went on having a commercial practice later on. And Raja Edry from, I think, Mumbai. I mean, of course, he must be 85 or 90 or something. He worked with FL Wright, all three, besides Nari Gandhi. So Nari Gandhi put up some wonderful examples in Mumbai. And of course, all the houses are sold off now to different owners. So that's a story.
Yeah, that's good to know because I couldn't find information. I just found some Farooq Mistry or something like that, but there wasn't enough information that I could say, I could bring here. But that's good to know.
So now over to students. If you have any queries. So this restoration is still going on, or it's completed? Because Kiran did mention about the process. So
yeah, I mean, we're still, there's always something going on. Right now, obviously, the roof is of big concern because it's not sustainable. The water that's happening is not sustainable, and people don't. There aren't a lot of people who can work with this kind of a roof because it's not a traditional flat roof, and just poor decisions made in the past. So this is we are constantly looking for somebody to come and figure out what to do because this is another problem. Where the clear story meets the roof is a leak point. So there are, 3 or 4 places in the house where when there are heavy rains, we will have a leak in the roof. So we're kind of in every rain we find a new one. So maybe if we wait a year, we'll figure out where all the leaks are. Yeah, but the roof right now is the priority.
Okay. Yeah, over to Avni. Students can ask questions.
Thank you, Manoj. Shravan, you can continue with the questions.
Hi, but I thank you so much for the talk. It was great to actually hear about Frank Lloyd Wright from someone living in his houses because today these houses seem like such a museum piece when you actually like look at them from like just the computer. So it's quite nice to actually see like, how you lived in and you hear about these problems, like, ironically falling water had an issue of water falling from the roof. But to actually kind of just see these being addressed and actually being restored, that's absolutely like I mean, kind of jealous in a way, but also like it must be a tremendous task. So, I mean, what do you think he actually thought of his line in terms of Frank Lloyd Wright? Because his houses seem to be a lot like this idea of like, the the utility of the space comes much after sort of like his plan, the way he imagines the space visually. And I mean, you do see this, like, you do see a lot of strength given in the programming, but it seems like the house was designed as a drawing first, as an object first, and then as like, the concerns came in secondarily in a lot of his buildings.
Think you're absolutely right. So there is this story, and with Frank Lloyd Wright, you always have to figure out like what is story and what is myth. So sometimes I think that the people who worked with him, if they say, then I say, okay, this is probably a story with maybe 10% masala added. But the story about Frank Lloyd Wright and Falling Water, for example, and I'm telling you this in response to your question, it is said that the client was 3 hours away or something like this, and he had not done any work on the house. There were no drawings, nothing, and the guy said, okay, the client said, okay, I'm on my way, and Frank Lloyd Wright sits down and in 3 hours designs the entire building on paper. His apprentice says that the guy literally knew where every tree was and every stone was, and he designed the whole building because he had the whole building articulated in his head. And the apprentices were just kind of standing around and handing him pencils and telling everybody to be quiet while he drew the whole building. So obviously, this man sees an entire building in his head. I will say that living here, other than the kitchen, I frankly love the house. I love the way the space is planned. I love the fact that the bedrooms are on that side. So during the day, when we are in our other house, because the bedroom is right off the living room, and during COVID we were working at home, every opportunity we got, I was in the bedroom taking a nap. Over here I have to really like decide that I have to go to the bedroom, so I'm like forced to sit here and work. And the fact that because of this open plan, I love open plans. I think for a home, it is a great idea because literally every time people come, everybody's here by the kitchen. So I'm going to say that I personally love the way this house works. The backyard is over here, so I can have a gathering of more than 100 people in the front yard, and they will not have to step 1 foot into the house. And then I can have a private party of 200 people in the backyard, and they will be completely separated from the public space. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I did a study of Roby House, one of my first like actual houses to study in architecture, and like just the porosity of his designs in general, it really works with the open plan. It's not just an open plan in the sake of like naming it.
Yeah, and speaking of Usonian, I would urge you to look at the Jacobs house, because in the Jacobs house, he is pulling together ideas that he was working with as a young man, probably, 25, 30-year-old guy. All these ideas that he has in his head, he's poured into the Jacobs house. And that is supposedly the purest example of Usonian architecture in terms of cost, architecture, plan, and all of that. But yeah, so really look at that. It would be worthwhile to do that.
Thank you. I shall check that out.
Thank you. And good luck to you. I hope
Thank you
to
so much.
see your work somewhere soon.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Shravan. If anybody from the student body or the teachers have any questions, they can ask or put it in the chat right now.
Yeah, while people are thinking about questions, I'll just give you a view. Just look at those windows. It's we've lived in this house now for almost 2 years. Just look at this. There is not a single day that I don't wake up and I'm just in awe of what the light is doing. Every day. Sometimes, like this morning, I went into the family room bathroom and I have a plant in the bathroom, and literally the light was coming in from the clear story and hitting the plant. Like literally nothing else, like as if the plant had a spotlight. And I just stood there and I'm like, God. um, and so, this house has constant surprises like that.
Jimmy would like to ask a question.
Yeah, hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would just like to comment by saying that thank you for giving us an insight to your house. Not many are very comfortable in, I see you've put in a lot of effort, and it was also nice to see that that image where Nari Gandhi erected that stone sculpture, which I was looking out for a number of years, because I clearly remember that when Nari's mom was like here in India, there is a particular group that has studied his work intensely. We are of that era. Perhaps 30 years back, he was his work was really talked about and sorted. And those who did research did gather that his mother was really worried about his well-being in Taliesin West, and she wrote a very emotional letter to Frank saying that you've literally taken my son away and he's not responding and things like that. And that's when Frank Lloyd Wright writes to her saying that he's going to return soon. He talks about returning soon, and he's going to be with us always because he's taken these pains of leaving his mark here. Yeah, and we've never seen that. What he meant, and thanks to you, we get to see that today. As far as you spoke about the Frank Lloyd about the falling water houses, there is also another story um, about unbuilt houses that Frank Lloyd Wright had, and the renowned author Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is an author who wrote The Fountainhead, and she portrayed Frank Lloyd Wright as Howard Rock. Perhaps it was in his image that Howard Rock was portrayed in the book The Fountainhead. And it is believed that at a point of time, Ayn Rand did want a house built for herself. And if you look at the proposal that Frank Lloyd Wright did send for the Ayn Rand house, considering that she had and it's believed that he designed the house based on his description in the novel Fountainhead. Means she keeps writing about how he drew stark horizontal and vertical lines and all that. And if you see there's no waterfall there, but there is a water fountain that is there. If you look at that proposal of the unbuilt house of Ayn Rand, and you'll gather the similarities that you see in the falling waters, and you'll gather that how an author shaped the thoughts of an architect that went about becoming the house of the century. So if you'd ever get an
I have, let's say, let me back up a little bit because I have very strong opinions on this. I think, Ayn Rand is somebody who, first of all, I don't take her seriously. I think she's a pulp fiction writer, and I think Fountainhead is one of the stupidest books ever written. I think that Ayn Rand's might have and the reason I have strong opinions about this, and I'm glad you brought this up, because when I was an architecture student in India, I opened Fountainhead and I was like, yeah, man, I'm going to be Howard Rourke. I'm going to go and dynamite buildings I don't like and all this kind of stuff. An individual and architect is. But really, human beings are a social species. We cannot function without each other. And to your point, Frank Lloyd Wright actually in Taliesin was the whole concept of Taliesin West, Manoj will also tell you this, was this idea of a communal spirit in which people lived and worked and learned together, right? So, whether it's Nari Gandhi or, 600 other students, they lived in that house. They had concerts in that house. They really worked together as a team. This idea of individualism was really Wright having problems with people just copying European stuff and sticking it all over American landscape. Wright's idea really was, why aren't we doing something that is more individualistic? That his idea, I made a mistake. I should have had that as the final quote. But this idea that every house must have style, that was his idea of individualism, that it should not be this cookie cutter nonsense that goes on with what happens in America. One developer comes in and builds like 300 houses, out of which, there are 4 model houses and there are 300 houses. That was his idea. In terms of, what you said about Taliesin, about sharing this house, this is really something that Kiran and I feel very strongly about. When we went to architecture school in the 80s, we did not have the internet, we didn't have computers, we didn't have any of the resources that you guys have these days. And we were studying architecture from books. I don't know the good and bad of this, but I can tell you my 2 favorite architects are Gaudi and Frank Lloyd Wright. And I was able to visualize all of their work from a book. But I think it is so important that we share stories of, as architects, why are we designing these spaces? Who are we designing this for? We're not designing this, as Kiran might have told you when he talked to you about the airport, we're not designing airports for people today. We're designing airports for, Shravan's grandchildren, because we're not building an airport for Shravan. We're literally designing for his grandchildren, because this stuff is going to last 50, 60, 100 years. And that's why I think it is so important to share with other people, look, we're living in this house. This house is an 82-year-old house. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work. Some of it doesn't work on a social level. So this is actually, I'm glad you mentioned this, because I just wanted to tell you quickly, Usonian architecture, when you get a chance, take a look at Broadacre City. Okay, Broadacre City was Frank Lloyd Wright's vision of what a city would be. So basically he and he built literally a 12, well, he didn't build, his apprentices built 12-foot by 12-foot model of a city that is currently sitting in, I believe it's in the Museum of Modern Art. And Usonian architecture was actually a key component of the houses in Broadacre City. And what he was doing in Broadacre City was putting the architect at the center of society. So the architect would design every house, and the function of government would just be allotting land and stuff like that. And the architect would be the king designing, hundreds of houses. Take a look at Broadacre City and also take a look at it in the context of racial segregation and what it did or didn't do in the context of racial segregation. Because Broadacre City was actually the idea that at least one of the ideas that created this suburban sprawl that we have in America today. So it's kind of important to take a look at it.
Thank you. Nice knowing you.
Yeah, Avni, I think we've run out of time, so we can wrap.
Thank you, Jimmy, for that question. And thank you, Genevieve, for this presentation. It has been very invigorating for all of us.
Good. Take care, guys, and good luck to all of you. And if you're in the States, give me a call. Come on over.
Sure. Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.